Right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. My name is Hannah. I am a platform product marketer here at Tynes. We are joined today by Recorded Future's John Hall and Tynes' own Cassie Tron. Very excited to have you guys here. Both of these solution engineers are joining us today to cover how you will establish resilience through our combined solutions, combined products. So before we begin, how about we do some intros? Cassie, if you want to start us off a little bit about yourself and your role.
Yeah, thanks, Hannah. So Cassie Tron, I'm a solutions engineer here at Tynes. So I'm essentially a technical counterpart when we're talking through the sales process. Before this, I've been in security for probably 5 to 6 years in various roles.
Awesome, thank you. And John, our special guest, over to you.
Yeah, so thanks for having me. My name's John Hall. I'm also an SE at Recorded Future. I've been here for around 5 years, working with clients on how they implement our intelligence into their security practices. And before that, my background was mostly in intelligence analysis. So looking forward to it.
Great, thank you. Excited to have you both here. So before we get into the presentation, just want to quickly cover today. We're going to cover the challenges experienced when managing threat intelligence, how your workflows can improve that decision making, and then we'll close out with a live demo and some key takeaways at the end. As a reminder, please drop your questions in the chat and we will get to those at the end. But let's dive into the key challenges around threat data and alerts. So, John, Recorded Future is a machine learning platform that reduces the need for human intervention. What are the core challenges you've seen with managing threat intelligence?
Yeah, so I think the rundown here on the slides pretty much holds true for most security teams out there, unfortunately. And is one of the reasons we're really always preaching this kind of intelligence-led security practice. And that point there, kind of intelligence-led, which we'll get into a bit more throughout the webinar, doesn't just mean more data, but also better data driving, these day-to-day workflows, security operations, and really just risk management practices as well. I think maturing in the implementation of threat intelligence helps across the entire framework. So from tactical and operational, all the way to strategic intelligence production. And so what that kind of looks like in practice is all of the, actionable information, they'll kind of describe it as, with being all the sorts of contextual details you might need to make better decisions. At the level of technical indicators, something like flagging an IP as bad, but then also setting a risk score, and then maybe even showing it's a C2 server with known linkages to a particular threat actor. And what that does is not only remove some of the manual analysis that a tier one operator might have otherwise had to do, kind of partially solving for the resource constraints problem that most SOCs and really security teams deal with, but it also helps sort some of the kind of up leveling for junior analysts to make those triaging decisions without having to escalate to maybe more senior analysts that also are kind of overworked or overloaded with data points that they have to sift through. So moving from the personnel challenges, you can see the impacts then as well through anything from financial risk and reputational damages. If these teams are presented with thousands or millions of logs per day, and maybe there's either no good way to correlate against or enrich that data with threat intelligence, or if the intel they're bringing in is maybe bad or outdated, then you also run up against the volume of false positives or maybe even false negatives, that waste time to investigate. And so all this is kind of showing in recent years that CTI isn't quite a nice to have anymore, but has become recognized as really an integral component to the security tech stack.
Exactly. Yeah. And, with those challenges, there's a lot of places where workflows can fit in. And when Cassie, John, and I were prepping for this webinar, we talked a lot about the recorded future intelligence cycle as a good anchoring point for this discussion. So, John, I'll hand it off to you to kind of walk us through that.
Yeah, so the intelligence cycle will usually kick off with the direction phase, which could either be from the top down, maybe decision makers or risk managers interested in a new area of security, or even at a more tactical level, maybe with the output of a previous or ongoing incident response process. So, maybe with more near-term intelligence requirements to just kind of ensure defenses are shored up against whatever that breach was. In either case, though, this will then set the goals for the threat intelligence program for that iteration of the cycle. And then from there, collection is the process of gathering information to address the most important intelligence requirements defined in that first step of direction. From the perspective of recorded future, our collection, will span across ClearNet and dark web, so things like ransomware extortion sites, extremist forums, as well as security researcher blogs, all the way to social media and government communications. And so with something north of like 1.2 million sources, we're able to collect really anything relevant to the intel requirements an organization might have. After that processing is the transformation of collected information into a format usable by the organization. So for CTI in particular, that processing will involve getting that raw data, again, whether text or imagery, into both human readable formats as well as machine readable for the consumption, maybe into other security tools for more automated workflows. Analysis then is turning that process information into actual intelligence that can inform decisions. And that's kind of the key part, being able to actually do something with it. So going back to the earlier example, an IP address is a data point. Knowing it's a Russian IP is information, but then seeing it's a C2 server tied to the GRU is intelligence a security team can use to investigate kind of more broadly. And then finally, dissemination involves getting intelligence to the places it needs to go. More traditionally, this would involve, maybe getting written reports to intelligence consumers like managers and other decision makers. But with CTI, this dissemination is also how we scale that intelligence-led security practice with the kind of fresh, relevant context around all the workflows security teams are going through on a daily basis. And this is where the pairing here really kind of shines. We can produce all the highest quality intelligence we want, but it's with technology partners like Tynes that we're able to operationalize that data and intelligence through the kind of automated orchestrations like the ones Cassie's going to be demoing today.
Yeah. No, that is a perfect pairing. And Cassie, is there any more from the Tynes side you want to add to this piece?
Yeah, I mean, I think John really covered it, but the other thing I would say is you have all this great intel from recorded future, right? And now what do you do with it? And so that's really where Tynes comes into play through this dissemination aspect and being able to really help you scale and operationalize your threat mitigation strategy by moving faster, more efficiently, automating that entire enrichment process. Like John mentioned, people are just overwhelmed, overburdened, and then also being able to keep humans in the loop, or being able to understand and contextualize that threat intelligence before actually mitigating any threats or taking action within your environment.
That's a great point. Thank you. And when teams think about security in the sense like there's going to be a positive impact. So, John, I know this is something Recorded Future has looked into. Can you kind of explain a little bit more on the impact of threat intelligence?
Yeah, so I think this slide goes back to what I was touching on earlier with how CTI is more so viewed as necessary as opposed to just a nice to have. So with some of these statistics showcasing how impactful it can be when implemented correctly, uh, for a lot of our clients, an added problem is actually proving value, which is why tracking the sorts of KPIs on the screen here can really show security teams and their leadership what the before and after looks like for them once they really start focusing on that kind of intelligence-led practice. And these can obviously get a lot more granular as well, considering you could track things like reduction in time to discovery or patching vulnerabilities that need to be prioritized. But then also tracking can include proactive measures as opposed to just reactive ones. So maybe something like the number of preventive measures like policy or configuration changes made based on intelligence the team has received and then disseminated throughout the organization. Uh, and then, at an even broader level, what this also looks like potentially is increased stakeholder confidence in the team. So, with not only a reduction in security incidents taking place, but then also consistent guidance being provided to them based on the security team really understanding the threat landscape for the organization, and those stakeholders seeing that they have a kind of forward-looking, understanding of what the business is dealing with from a risk perspective.
Thank you. And now we can really look into the approach to using platforms like Tines and Recorded Future together. So, John, from your side, what are the things that you would suggest security teams look for as they handle threat data and alerts?
Yeah, so I guess I'd maybe start just real quick with how you look at the actual quality of the threat intelligence itself first, as teams are assessing the sources they're getting it from, or maybe they're doing gap analyses to see where they might have weak spots in coverage to begin with. Um, so this part really goes back to that kind of age-old characterization of intelligence, where the quality is based on those sort of three factors. So how timely is it? How relevant is it to your organization? And then what is the actionable value? And so looking at these three factors to decide if it's good enough to begin with, as well as how broad the scope and coverage is, I think is a good starting framework for teams as they might either begin working with intelligence or at least begin working with it to a greater extent. And then I think in terms of actually handling threat data, this kind of goes back again to the earlier point about operationalizing threat intelligence, at least at more tactical level. And so a big part of that is making sure that you get that data out of the silo. So not just living in finished intelligence reports your team or maybe a provider is writing, and having both those technical indicators as well as any contextual data integrated into things like your SIM or SOAR platform that broader teams are using on a daily basis. And I think centralizing threat intelligence in this way, a big part again of that intelligence-led security we talk about a lot here at Recorded Future, will clear up a lot of the issues with the second part of your question with alert handling. That added intelligence helps teams to better categorize alerts first. If you have a bunch of IP addresses involved, maybe in potentially malicious activity, but then you have the ability to immediately identify a subset of them that are known C2 servers. That's a huge time savings. And then the other part of it, which again we'll see here in the demo, is having all of this additional context and information on alerts that are coming in. It lets you automate those repetitive tasks and create playbooks, around those more common incident response processes.
Yeah, and to Cassie, we talked about how Tines can operationalize all of that data coming through and allowing these analysts to take action. Is there anything else from the Tines side we want to add here?
Yeah, I think we pretty much covered it, right? It's just being able to scale and operationalize that information and be able to take action in an intelligent way at the end of the day, instead of being overburdened and overwhelmed by those alerts that are coming in and being, having to research all of that information.
Yeah. And now that we have, speaking of Tines, Cassie, if you want to jump into the demo, I know everyone's going to be very excited to see this one.
Yeah, thanks, Hannah. So, with Tines, there are a couple different ways that we can interact with this data and this information that we're receiving from our partners like Recorded Future. And so one of the ways that we can interact with that data, especially for maybe junior analysts who are really just trying to learn how to navigate the security threat landscape, they might need a little bit of help. And, maybe their team is already kind of caught up with other things. So we have an AI chat interface called Workbench. And importantly, this chat interface and all of the information, all that data is contained to your tenant. It never leaves your tenant. It's never trained on your data, but we're able to, at the same time, ground the AI and the responses within your data in your environment. And so if we look at analyzing a hash, for example, in Recorded Future, you can go ahead and simply ask in natural language, could we analyze this hash that we've received? What'll happen is Workbench will go out to Recorded Future and send in that hash. In this case, it will actually ask us to confirm that we do want to interact with this third-party service, in this case, Recorded Future. And so you can still maintain that human in the loop. So your AI is not just hanging out, interacting with your environment without any confirmation. That's all configurable as well. We can see when we get back nice summarized information. So all the same information that would be received during a general call out to the Recorded Future service asking to analyze this hash is presented here, but it's summarized in an easily readable format for someone like those junior analysts who are just, again, trying to get their hands around kind of dealing with threats and things like that. And so, John, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about kind of what is unique about the intel that Recorded Future is presenting to us here. But
yeah, I think kind of part of the value here is that any of the alerts that might kick off based on our data or investigations into specific IOCs like this workflow, in no case is Recorded Future just going to tell somebody that an IOC or whatever the entity is that you're looking at is malicious, and then not give you one kind of broader context around it, but then tell you, kind of how malicious is it, so that you can sort of rack and stack, whatever, the alerts are that you have or the IOCs that you're investigating. So, we'll give you things like criticality level. In our risk modeling, we'll go from 0 to 99. And that's, our own proprietary modeling. So like in the case of vulnerabilities, we don't just base it on CVSS. You could have a CVSS of like 3, but if we're seeing it actively exploiting the wild, that'll be in the 90s. So, kind of without having to go into third-party tools, just doing those quick lookups of, IOCs, whether it's through, Tines workflow like this or Recorded Future, you get some of that extra information that you would need, which, in the past would have either required them to escalate to tier 2, tier 3, or at the very least, again, they'd have to jump out to other tools, and it sort of doubles, triples the time it takes to go through that workflow. And so a lot of that context is included directly within Tines. We know, there's a lot of people that have the integration but don't use the platform a lot, and so they'd like to stick within their tool of choice, in this case being Tines. But then in those cases where they do need extra context, if they were to jump over into recorded future, then they would see the full suite of risk rules where we give you, exactly the names of why we're verdicting, risk score, things like validation URLs, evidence details, and kind of additional linkages that they might need for more advanced research.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks, John. So that whole your risk score 70 is not great, right? Which is why it's popping up as malicious. And so from this point, if we wanted to go ahead and open up a Jira ticket or ticket in your other ticketing systems, ServiceNow, et cetera, we could do that directly from Workbench as well. So being able to, like John mentioned, stay within one tool. It doesn't seem like the biggest deal to have to context switch between all these different tools, but when you're having to switch multiple times a day and go to 10, 15 different tools and then collect all of that information manually just to simply open up a ticket for auditing and further investigation, it really does add up at the end of the day. And so when we look at other ways to interact with Tines, of course, folks, if they do know about Tines, it's really this workflow kind of view and interaction, right? And so if you didn't want a human in the loop, for example, if maybe we want to automatically be enriching different alerts and information that we're receiving, asking Recorded Future to do that enrichment, we can also do that behind the scenes. And so in this case, what's happening is, we receive an alert from one of our other systems and say, again, we want to look at this hash. So I'm going to go ahead and send that hash over to our workflow here. You can see in real time that workflow actually work through that process and go out to Recorded Future, look that hash up, and then depending on whether or not the hash was found, we're going to simply present either, hey, that hash isn't found, or if we look at our event data, because it was found, as we might expect, all of that information from Recorded Future is presented in human readable JSON formatting. So all of that information that was summarized nicely within Workbench is present here in its raw format. And you can then maybe take the evidence string and the rule, et cetera, and create your ticket automatically that way without any human interaction, if that's what your run books would prefer and your processes would prefer. So just giving you that flexibility to be able to interact with this threat intelligence and really integrate it into your business processes, however you choose, is really where Tines shines and where we come into play when we're talking about this intelligence cycle that John was talking about earlier. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you, Cassie. No, that was a great demo, and I loved being able to see it from the Workbench perspective, but then also looking at it as a full story. So thank you so much for that overview. And I'm sure we have a bunch of questions that have come in just from watching that and also listening to you guys. So to kick off the Q&A, how can organizations balance the need for comprehensive threat intelligence with the challenge of managing data overload?
Yeah, I guess I could start. So, that kind of part about intel needing to be timely, relevant, and actionable. The relevancy here is kind of one of the things that comes up first for managing, data overload. So if you have, threat feeds that, one, going back to timely, are just full of stale data, that can involve a lot of false positives. But then if you have, intelligence provided to you that's not really curtailed to your industry, your organization, that's a lot to sift through for analysts. And then in terms of kind of the technical, enrichment and correlation of threat intelligence, that's also what can sort of refine, a team's ability to work with it. So if it's all this data kind of running in the background and then it's just being correlated against the logs that are coming through your system, then you're only being notified really of what you need to look at, instead of just this large swath of data. And then you have to sort of see what amongst that is relevant to you. It's sort of just when it's integrated into your current workflow, then it's just going to be business as usual. But if something comes up that your intelligence provider or whatever your CTI team is working on has something to say about it, then you'll be flagged, and there'll be some kind of triage related information that you'll be given.
Yeah, it's a delicate balance, but I feel like once you think about it, teams can really manage it. And Cassie, what would you say are the biggest challenges security teams face when shifting from a reactive to a proactive cybersecurity strategy?
I think it's just deciding, at which points do we want to really automate certain processes, and having to shift from really just ingesting alerts and reacting to them, and shifting instead to being able to automate some of that enrichment process, and really being able to start hunting for threats proactively within the environment. I think a lot of it just involves a mindset switch in a lot of ways, and being able to build your business processes around it that way. And that's really where Tines can help you, sort of operationalize that mindset shift as well.
Yeah. And John, do you have anything to add on to this one before we hop to the next?
Yeah, I think the kind of other angle maybe to look at it from, in addition to what Cassie said, is that on the technical indicator side, teams will kind of hone in on that because that's what they're comfortable with. A lot of people with cybersecurity, data science backgrounds, so they're looking at the ones and zeros of IOC enrichment, correlation as it comes in, and a lot of times that lends itself, if you're not looking at it from like a threat hunting perspective, to kind of more reactive playbooks being developed and just as alerts come in. But then, just to kind of shift more proactively, not missing out on the other aspects of CTI where, you have that more kind of forward looking, operational or strategic intelligence. So anything from kind of campaign analysis as it relates to, maybe business initiatives that your organization wants to get into. So if there's new types of technologies they want to develop, or new markets, or product lines, seeing what are some relevant campaigns in those kind of not necessarily new industries, but new kind of areas of your industry, and then getting a little bit more in the weeds maybe with actual TTP analysis as opposed to just IOCs. That way you can sort of see what kind of conversations you might need to have from like a security control assessment perspective. So again, it's not, playbook development and, alert correlation is going to be kind of one half of it, catching things as they're coming across the network, seeing, the prioritization of threat actor XYZ is most likely to target your organization, maybe extrapolating what TTPs are associated with that group or groups, and then seeing, from like a red or purple teaming perspective, how do you stack up against those types of techniques or attack vectors should they, theoretically target you in the future. And that'll help, kind of plug into like conversations of resource allocation and security budgets, and that will help you get to that more kind of proactive perspective.
Nice. Yeah. One question someone had in the chat was, will you be able to do advanced queries with the recorded future API in the future? Advanced queries and Tines, I believe.
Well, I wish Jamie, our head of product, was on the team on the call here right now. That I don't want to speak for our roadmap. So I'm not sure. We do, right now we have the ability to do that, obviously in the UI through the AQB, as well as the ability through our AI interactive sessions to do free text construction of advanced queries. In terms of doing that with the API, I can't really give an answer yes or no. So.
Okay, thank you. And you mentioned AI. I was curious how. So, John, you just mentioned AI. Cassie, in your demo, you were talking about how you can bring Workbench into the equation. What other ways do you see the potential for builders to leverage AI in this type of conversation?
Yeah, absolutely. So within Tines, we also have the ability to leverage AI, both in what we call an action. So you're able to summarize different information using AI within a workflow itself. And then we also have what we call automatic mode within our event transformations. And so maybe you have less technical users who are not as comfortable with like our formula scheme and different modules and ways to interact with that data. You're able to actually just describe with natural language what you would like to do with that information, and the automatic mode will handle that for you using AI instead of having to construct that yourself. So couple different ways that AI pops up within Tines today.
Yeah, thank you. And a question for John. We know bad actors aren't going away, and you can reduce the impact of threats, but it's still a when and not an if scenario. So, what are some of the top areas Recorded Future sees as critical for keeping ahead of bad actors?
Yeah. So I know a lot of people use that kind of when, not if, like there's going to be a security breach. I don't really fully agree with that, because I think if and it kind of goes to that adage of like attackers only have to be right once. But if you look at it through kind of a framework of like a kill chain of a cyber attack targeting an organization, the attacker also has to kind of be right at every step of that. And so each stage, each step of that process gives defenders an opportunity to kind of shore up defenses or just kind of mitigate risk. And so if you break it down through a framework like that and then apply intelligence, you can see through the reconnaissance phase. If you have a comprehensive intelligence program, you can kind of mimic that outside in look at your organization similarly to how a threat actor or a threat group might do it. So seeing what leaked credentials or identities are out there, seeing what your attack surface looks like. So having a good kind of asset registry and seeing of your internet facing technologies, where's misconfigurations, where are their vulnerabilities, where's maybe their shadow IT. Your operations team spun something up 6 months ago, and either you thought they decommissioned it or maybe they just never told you about it. So that would be kind of one thing. And then as you kind of get down the line on like initial access, that's where it's kind of more of like having that correlation on like IOC enrichment comes into play for your SIM or your SOAR workflows. And then kind of at a more granular level than even just IOC is having a good read on the kind of TTP, like take MITRE, attack matrix of what's likely to target your organization. And if you can see sort of what are those known TTPs that you might be dealing with, that can give security teams a kind of idea of the sort of like telltale signs of activities that might be going on in their environment. So post breach, but as those groups are looking to kind of do privilege escalation or move laterally as they need to actually like look for systems or data, maybe in the case of ransomware that they want to encrypt. And so then you'd be able to kind of see things that are, examples of like living off the land techniques or whatever, where, your traditional enrichment or alert, monitoring capabilities wouldn't catch. But if you have the intelligence to let you know the kind of full scope of what's going on, that would kind of be it. And then the last thing I would say is that, your supply chain is also a huge issue. So, being notified, early warning, and to what extent suppliers have been hit by different cyber attacks, that can also give security teams a good sort of heads up in terms of what their exposure might be based on leakages from a supplier. So there's a lot of different ways to look at it, but yeah, I would say that that's kind of a good framework to approach. How not just recorded future, but just CTI can augment all the traditional security practices that you're already doing.
Yeah, thank you. And as we're talking about the different ways to stay ahead, I do want to just quickly give a shout to the Tynes Library. We have a bunch of stories in there that involve Tynes and Recorded Future together. I think it's like 16 of them at least. We'll be sending them out to everyone who signed up for the webinar in a follow-up email tomorrow, so you can definitely keep an eye out for that. It includes the one that Cassie went through about enriching IOCs, but also so many more that you can check out. One last question I wanted to ask is talking about measuring the impact. How, from your guys' experience, how have you seen security teams measure the impact of threat intelligence and management programs? And John, I know you talked about this a little bit, but anything else that both of you guys would like to add here before we wrap up?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'll start. It's definitely not always the easiest thing. Intelligence can be kind of this like ephemeral sort of thing, especially when you look at, it's kind of preventing things that have never happened. So you have to sort of prove out that value that way. A lot of it goes into, it's helpful when you have good metrics before and after you implement threat intelligence. So that would be kind of a good starting point. So like at a technical level, it could be things like, again, mean time to remediation or improve response times. But it's also really important to be able to place that into business terms that management can resonate with. And so that'll kind of depend on what the metric is. I know a lot of times, you could take things like you had X amount of automated resets, based on, dark web, like credential leak monitoring. And so you could kind of tie that back to potential cost savings. There's a lot of stats floating out around there of like average cost of breach, from like a downtime perspective. You could get stats on, it's this amount of dollars per minute downtime, especially for organizations that have like an e-commerce component to it. And then so looking at, previous downtime metrics compared to current state could be another thing. So whatever is like unique to your organization, just kind of running through that thought exercise of, okay, here's the security metrics that we have, but what does management actually care about, and what's kind of the Venn diagram there?
Yeah, thank you. And Cassie, anything that like you've seen, as you're working with Tynes customers, that's something a customer has done that has stood out to you or you've seen in the past on measuring this impact?
I think most customers are using things like the mean time to resolve, like John had mentioned. But one of the other things we could do within Tynes is report on, different types of threats that are coming through. So you're able to track, maybe is it a lot of phishing alerts, et cetera, and just being able to break it up that way as well. And just see, where is your threat intelligence really helping you out within those kind of areas of concern that you're getting a lot of alerts over.
Yeah, thank you. That's great advice, Cassie and John. Thank you for that. And before we jump off, just wanted to add a little more advice, something everyone can take away when it comes to using Recorded Future and Tynes together. So we want you all to consider intelligence-led security when setting your threat intelligence strategy. You should also be understanding where automation can help you scale. And then finally, operationalizing threat mitigation where possible is going to have a huge benefit. So keeping those at the forefront if you keep those at the forefront, you're going to have a recipe for success when using recorded future and Tines together. So that is all we had today. My thanks to John and Cassie for presenting and sharing all that great information. My thanks to everyone who threw in questions in the chat. They were definitely useful. Loved the conversation we got to get out of this. And as I said, some of you guys were asking about other stories. You could see a recorded future and Tines together, and we'll be sending those out via email after this webinar tomorrow. So please keep an eye out for that. But other than that, I will say thank you all. Thank you to our presenters, and everyone have a great day.